Welcome to Preceptor Module 4, Preceptee Competence, Planning a Learning Experience, brought to you by the Montana Center to Advance Health Through Nursing, or the Montana CON Academic Progression in Nursing Grant, funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. As mentioned in the 3 previous webinars, the Montana CON is the official state action coalition of the Future of Nursing Campaign for Action in Montana. My name is Sandra Couse, and I'm a member of the faculty at Montana State University College of Nursing and the co-project director of the APIN grant. I am pleased to welcome you to this 4th webinar for preceptors. Also mentioned previously, the purpose of the 5 modules in this series is to enhance preceptor effectiveness and satisfaction with the precepting experience. Criteria for successful completion of this webinar include attending the entire webinar for Module 4, reading the assigned chapters in the Ulrich 2012 book, and affirming completion of the reading, and completing and submitting the evaluation form at the end of the webinar. So far in this series, we've covered roles and relationships in Module 1, communication in Module 2, learning styles and teaching strategies in Module 3, and in this module, we'll talk about planning a precepted experience. And then the 5th module in this series, we'll discuss evaluation and feedback. As in previous modules, we have created a password-protected blog or a discussion board for Module 4 with 1 contact hour awarded for those who choose to participate. This space is highly recommended and provides an opportunity to share your insights related to this module and your experience as a preceptor. If all 3 components of Module 4 are completed, the reading, webinar, and blog, you will receive 4.6 contact hours from the Montana Nurses Association. And I think that is the end of the commercial and the housekeeping that we need to complete for this module. So the reading assigned for this module, chapters 4 and 5 of Ulrich 2012, includes definitions, concepts, and theories. A study just published by Chang et al. 2015 found that preceptors felt that the most clinically useful component of preceptor education was information on communicating with preceptees, and the least included theoretical concepts that lacked practical application and real examples. So, the challenge for all of us is to take these dry theoretical concepts and bring the ideas to life with our real examples from professional practice or your experience with a preceptee. And we would love to read the stories of your experience in the blog. So, this is our challenge, and throughout this module, I'm going to provide some examples, and I'm hoping that you will be thinking of your own examples that you'll be able to share with us. I think this enriches this experience when we can actually put theory and practice, marry those 2 together. So our inquiry questions for this module are: first, what is involved with understanding the development of preceptee confidence and competence? Next, how can the preceptor help a preceptee develop critical thinking, clinical reasoning, and clinical judgment? Third, what are the differences between goals, objectives, and outcomes, and how are these tools used to develop an effective precepting plan? And finally, what is the value of preceptors' familiarity with the use of learning taxonomies? So, as you can see, here, these are very theoretical concepts that we have that we'll be discovering in this module. So to explore these and other questions, I sat down with an outstanding preceptor and asked him how he implements his role and how he helps students develop competence, confidence, and clinical reasoning. So just so we can put theory to practice, we're going to provide some short clips from the interview with Caleb Jort, the nursing supervisor of an inpatient mental health center. And these clips are going to appear throughout the module at certain points. Schools of nursing exist, provide the key ingredients that each student or new nurse needs to succeed in practice. Curricula are infused with pathophysiology, health assessment, psychosocial nursing, pharmacology, evidence-based practice and research, clinical courses that integrate medical, surgical, OB, peds, psych nursing concepts, population health, and management and leadership theories. There is rarely a missed ingredient, not even a carrot or a scallion left out here or there. But to make the soup, the key ingredient is the broth, the practical essential that brings everything together. So we know this soup has every good ingredient, but the mixture needs to simmer until all the ingredients combine, and this takes time. So if you note this quote, Benner talks about that nurses need multiple ways of thinking, such as clinical reasoning, clinical imagination, as well as critical, creative, scientific, and formal criterial reasoning, and taking into context and concerns of the patient and family, trends and trajectories, possibilities, resources, and constraints. And if we think about nursing in that way, we realize why we are so busy when we're providing care. Benner also says a central goal of nursing education is for the learner to develop an attuned, response-based practice and capacity to quickly recognize the nature of whole situations in terms of most pressing and least pressing concerns. Experiential learning depends on an environment where feedback on performance is rich and with the opportunities for articulating and reflecting on the experience are deliberately planned. And this is from her book on page 43. That is a specific quote. And so I think this is really captures a lot of the role of the preceptor and some of the challenges, too, to provide all of this experience. So for our first clip from Caleb Jort, I asked him this question. I mentioned that one of the greatest challenges is teaching a novice nurse critical thinking and clinical decision-making skills. So I said, how do you coach a preceptee to develop from practical to more analytical thinking? And this is what he said.
Critical thinking is a tough one. I think because I intuitively know what it is. I can see it, I can feel it, I can smell it. As a nurse manager, I know when it's there, and probably even more so, I know when it's not there in a nurse. But it gets challenging for me and very tricky for me to have to define that for a nurse, a new nurse, even a not so new nurse. And I've had to try to do that before, say, I'm just not really seeing a lot of good critical thinking on your part. And of course, then they want to know, well, what is that? What does it look like? Can you give me an example? And so it gets a little bit intangible at that point. I think one of the easiest ways for me to try to describe that to somebody or get them to start thinking about what critical thinking is a statement that I've carried with me for a long time, and that's, knowing enough to know what you don't know. Particularly, I think, as a new nurse, a new grad nurse, it's a very important skill to have, and to not be afraid to reach out to a physician or a therapist or a nurse or anybody else on the treatment team to say, why are we doing this? Not in a confrontational way, but in a, I want to be a part of this team, this treatment team, and I want to learn. I'm a new nurse, I want to learn. So I don't know how that works. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know why you just prescribed this medication or that treatment. Can you tell me why, so I can learn and be a better critical thinker?
Being able to critically think is one indicator of competence. And if we define competence as an expected level of performance that integrates knowledge, skills, abilities, and judgment, this is the ANA definition, then we can grasp that it is a compilation. Competence requires a lot of different abilities. So one of the common complaints that we hear about new graduates is that they seem to have trouble critically thinking. So what it makes me smile when I hear that, because I realize that it takes a lot to actually critically think. It takes bringing everything together. And until someone is in practice for a certain amount of time, all of that soup may not be cooked. And that's all I can think is that wait until that soup is enriched with the cooking it's going to need. So if we're going to describe performance competencies, we usually think in terms of knowledge, skill, ability, and they've added judgment here. And again, the American Nurses Association describes knowledge as knowledge related to competence as encompassing thinking, understanding of science and humanities, professional standards of practice, and insights gained from context, practical experiences, personal capabilities, and leadership performance. Skills, on the other hand, are psychomotor, communication, interpersonal, and diagnostic capabilities. Ability is the capacity to act effectively, requires listening, integrity, knowledge of one's strengths and weaknesses, positive self-regard, emotional intelligence, and openness to feedback. Judgment is a critical thinking, problem-solving, ethical reasoning, and decision-making. So, when you think about how difficult it is, it's like flying a plane upside down, I suppose. So that's the theory behind all that we're doing. So what does this look like in practice? I would ask you to think of a nurse that exemplifies these characteristics. Maybe that nurse issued a preceptor. So I was trying to think of one way that I recently received some information from a colleague, and this article, Am I Going to Be Okay?, is in the American Journal of Nursing. I think it's March 2014. It's a very brief, just one page, and I really encourage you to look at this article in totality, and we can link this to the website so you can reach it quickly. So this is the story, and I thought this was so excellent in demonstrating what all occurs when a nurse is taking care of a patient. And, of course, when you just look at this picture, the first thing you think is someone is having some respiratory distress. And that's exactly what was happening in the story. And she was asking the nurse, am I going to be okay? Now, you have to understand the background, and that's what this one-page story does. It tells you about that. But it also talks about nurses doing a lot of things at that moment, taking care of the physical needs, but also providing emotional care and creating that trust that is necessary that we all know is so important to caregiving. So she talks about her first instinct was to say, yes, everything will be fine. And yet she just stopped short of that, thinking about who this person was. She was a patient that had had this particular genetic problem for years and had a lot of respiratory distress before. She'd been in the hospital many times. And so after thinking just for a fraction of a second, she said to her, I don't know exactly what will happen, but I'll stay with you. And so that, I'll just let you go ahead and read the rest of the story. But instead of saying what came to her mind first and what many of us may say, actually, when we experience, when we're talking to patients, what this nurse did in terms of her intuition, or fighting her intuition, seemed really a great example of what we're talking about here. So this article, I think it does express the very essence of patient-centered care, and we think about that a lot. And so that's just one example, and so be sure and put your own examples to what this means to have knowledge, skill, ability, and judgment, and how we provide care, and how we teach and work with preceptees. So we often talk, this is a pretty common model, it's used pretty often, the whole stages of competencies, or competence, and if we think about, take apart how we reason and think and what we do automatically anymore. If you're very, very good at something, you may be unconscious competent. You just do it automatically. But just starting at the beginning, when you first start out, that unconscious incompetence, that is really one of those things, you don't know what you don't know. Dangerous for a novice nurse. It's that blissful ignorance. You really have no clue what you don't know. You're walking in, you're going to just do what you do know, but there is so much more that you don't know that you could actually cause harm. So the next, after that nurse has been around for a while, maybe 6 months or so, hopefully it won't take that long, but you never know, they reach that stage of conscious incompetence. So they are, you don't know, kind of a deer in the headlights. You don't know what you need to know at that moment. There's something you need to do, but you have to ask, you have to get help, you need help. So that's that next stage. After that, the next conscious competence is that you know. In other words, you walk into that same situation maybe 2 weeks later, and because you've experienced it, you know exactly what to do, and you're fully aware, and you take action. After that, time goes by, you have that same experience, and you can't even explain it because you know it so well, you don't even have to think about it. And that's the unconscious competence. So an example of that is a nurse in the emergency department that sees a patient come in, immediately is assessing that patient. Doesn't even have to walk up to it. That person is taking that person's vital signs just with their vision. And so that's that ability. And if someone else, a new person walked in, the nurse has taken 10 actions while someone else is still standing there trying to figure out, where the equipment is. That nurse is actually moving right ahead and moving on. And the new person might wonder, how do you know that? And that's a very important thing to be able to communicate with preceptees. If that person was a preceptor, to explain to the preceptee, okay, this is taking that apart is sometimes difficult. But the last reflective competence is that stage where you've reached unconscious competence, and you can analyze how you reached that place and teach it to someone else. And so that last phase is really important for preceptors. So there are several models for competence, and there are a lot of competencies. So there will be a website link to the Montana Con website on the Preceptor website. And the COPA model is one that we use. And this is a model that's been around for some time. The Competencies, Outcomes, Performance Assessment model. It's quite involved. It has 8 different sections to it. Assessment and interventions, communication skills, critical thinking skills, humanistic, caring, and relationship skills, management, leadership, teaching, knowledge integration. So there are a number of competencies that are nested under each of these categories in this model. And this is a model that was created by Lindbergh in 1999, and there is an article in 2009 that will also link on the Montana Con website, so you can look at that. So this is a practice-based competency model, and it's very similar to the Couse competencies, the quality and safety education for nurses that we talked about in Module 1. And the Couse competencies are just another set having to do with quality and safety. Lots of overlap between the COPA model and Couse. The 6 categories included in the Couse competencies are patient-centered care, teamwork and collaboration, quality improvement, safety, health informatics, and evidence-based practice. So if we think about a nurse that is providing safe care and quality care at an advanced level, they would have competencies under each of these categories. And in terms of patient-centered care, the example of the nurse taking care of the individual with a respiratory, acute respiratory event is an example of patient-centered care, and that a person can, if a nurse is going to provide that, that's a good example. That's an excellent example of that. Along the way, probably overlapping is teamwork and collaboration, and probably evidence-based practice. So that these entities are not exclusive and operating alone. So there are 5 characteristics of competence according to Carney and Kenward 2010 and National Council of State Boards of Nursing study. And if we look at these areas of juggling complex patients and assignments, intervening to improve patient and family response, applying interpersonal skills, seeing the big picture, adopting an attitude of curiosity and lifelong learning. So Carney and Kenward, in their article, Nurse Competence Development During the First 5 Years of Practice in the Journal of Nursing Regulation, will also post this to the website. They gathered more than 2,000 practice anecdotes from new nurses during their first 5 years of practice, and then analyzed the descriptions the nurses gave of definitions of competence and how it developed over time. So nurses define competence as efficient care amid complex priorities, rapid response to subtle changes in patient conditions. See if this doesn't sound familiar in your work environment. Next thing, seeing the big picture and working the system on behalf of the on the patient's behalf. Interpersonal warmth, respect, and authority, and committed desire to learn and improve. And so they say that support for development of these qualities may promote nursing care quality in a high acuity practice environment, but I have witnessed that this type of support also is very important in community settings and in public health environments. So wherever that nurse is working, this experience in the first 5 years is going to make a difference, and preceptors, we know, are so critical to that. So after I asked that first question, one of the greatest challenges of teaching a novice is critical thinking and clinical decision-making, Caleb mentioned that he had one more thing to say, and so we turned on the camera for just a minute, and he talked about a missed opportunity for a preceptee to learn some of the juggling skills that we can see in this slide. And so here's Caleb again.
Another challenge that I've seen as being a preceptor is that, you know, the preceptee will come to spend the 4 hours or 8 or 12 or the shift with you, and oftentimes I find myself, you know, saying, well, you know, just wait here for a minute in the office because I got to run and do this thing. In my mind, thinking it's a fairly trivial, meaningless thing that isn't going to have a whole lot to do with their, you know, their management course. And I probably minimize that a lot because what I go do seems very everyday, mundane to me. But I have realized, you know, after doing it a couple times, is that probably what I just did was maybe one of the most important things, one of the most key underlying things to being a preceptor. And the other thing too, I'll think I'm just going to run down and answer a quick question or do a quick thing and come back. But I've also learned that as a manager, you do about 15 things between your office and back again. And every single one of those little things cumulatively adds up to what it is that we do as managers. And if we're precepting somebody in the management of nursing, then they should be following right along. So I guess the bottom line, or the short of that story, is hook them to you at your hip and don't let them leave. Let them really experience what it is to get sidelined or hit sideways with 15 different things when you're just trying to go do one thing and come right back.
So I think that's a great example of some of the things we take for granted, and we forget that, this person may need this experience, so I think I'll take them with me. So the essence of critical thinking, and this is from Ulrich. The whole section of Chapter 4 on critical thinking, from pages 59 to 69, is the best summarized work on critical thinking, clinical reasoning, clinical judgment that I have actually seen. Another great source on this topic is Benner's most recent book that we've quoted from earlier, Educating Nurses, A Call for Radical Transformation. That book is just excellent, with lots of current ideas on what the nurse of the future is going to need. So students come with head knowledge, but as Caleb mentioned in that first clip, a student or a new nurse or an experienced nurse in a new setting must be given the space and the safety to ask questions. So this whole idea of people come with this foundation of knowledge. It may even be a fairly solid foundation of knowledge. But they also have to be in an environment where they're willing to ask questions. This whole, the help to recognize new answers or make new connections along the way. So if you're looking for a tool to help you examine the components, skills, and sub-skills of critical thinking, make a copy of Table 4.1, it's on page 61 in the reading, and put it someplace that you can find it easily. The value of core skills are included in the core skills of critical thinking: interpreting, analyzing, evaluating, inferring, explaining, and self-regulation. And that's all explained very well. So one of the things that we like to do with students, and I'm sure you do with preceptees, is get them to externalize their thinking and say to you, what are you thinking and why? They can say that to you also. You just took action on that. What caused that? What were you thinking when you did that? So I can better understand, and I can put that in my explanation of how this might look in the future. So I think about how contagious its attitude is when you are working with students, and Singy calls this, when this exists in a place, a learning organization, where we can acknowledge our ignorance and constantly seek to do better. In these organizations, nurses are appreciated for their professional accountability and responsibility for assuring quality and safety. And in terms of the most important thing is that intellectual humility, or acknowledging our ignorance, or being in an environment where you can acknowledge your ignorance. I completely forgot how this works, and go up to a colleague and say, here, go with me on this. So this whole idea of, I think that this wonderful flower that we're looking here, that is nothing but a pest in our yards, but the effectiveness of a dandelion to spread seeds is the very thing that we want to see in our organizations, where we practice habits of the mind, confidence, contextual perspective, creativity, flexibility, inquisitiveness, all of these characteristics that help us provide better care. We want our new graduates, our undergraduates, our new nurses to be in this environment where we can work and think together. So I really can't say a single thing to improve on the information on pages 63 and 64 in Ulrich. If you want to know how to precept and develop critical thinking, study the key questions that Alfaro Lafer, 1999, provides, and that's on page 63. And then the suggestions on page 64. Another tool that I recently read about is in Sandow, and I will put this resource on your list also that you can look at. A tool for critical thinking is the MAP tool. It's a coaching, critical thinking coaching tool. So it's similar to the 1-minute preceptor, where the M stands for looking at missing relevant information. What other information might you want to know? What do you think led to this? So starting with that, the missing relevant, what am I missing here that I need? The A is for anticipation. What do you think may happen next with this patient? What would you like to see happen next? How can you facilitate that happening? And then P, prioritization. What needs to be done first? How do you know what to do first? So with new graduates, everything is important. And that's one of the things that a lot of the research is showing, is that helping people prioritize and delegate is one of the most important things that happens early on. And that's that role of the preceptor, saying, this is how I prioritize this. When that nurse goes down the hall with Caleb George and says, oh my goodness, the person just did 50 things and did them well, well, he probably prioritized another 150 on his way down the hall. But the things that he did, he put first. And that's part of what he was saying. Take that person along so they can see, and then you can debrief later about that. So clinical reasoning, and Cantor defines clinical reasoning as the process by which nurses and other clinicians make their judgments, and includes both deliberative process of generating alternatives, weighing them against the evidence, choosing the most appropriate, and then patterns that might be characterized as engaged practical reasoning. So it includes analysis or examining elements, all the data, weigh the alternatives and the potential outcomes. So that's that analytical process. It includes intuition, and this is the part that you build over time as you have more experience. But intuition is experience and your ability to match patterns. Things you've seen before are happening again, and you can better tell, you make a decision based on what you're matching there. And then the narrative part, telling and interpreting a story about an issue. So again, the AJN article is a great example of a nurse that actually wrote down an experience and talked about it and analyzed it. And that whole narrative is one of the things we bring to our preceptees and to students, is we tell our stories. So I want to bring back that bird. What do you know about this bird? What type is it? What are its habits? Where does it live? How does it live? So basically, you can go pick up a bird book, and much as I did, I just happen to love this bird. This particular bird is really one of my favorites, because it has such an amazing, feisty personality. And in the spring, I know that spring is here. When these birds arrived, I think they've probably flown from Texas or Mexico. They've come a long way, but they're just as enthusiastic as they have been in the previous years, and I enjoy every minute of it. Now, in the bird book, I've learned everything I can about barn swallows. I do know that they do make a messy nest on the side of the house or the barn, but it doesn't bother me much because I get to see them raise their young. One thing the book does not tell me, and that is something I've learned intuitively through my experience, by watching and matching some patterns that I have seen in the barnyard, I know something about this bird that is not in the bird books, and that is this bird hates cats. And this bird, I don't think any bird really likes a cat, but this bird takes cats on. So every spring, I can always tell when the eggs are in the nest, when the cat just walks out across the barnyard like it does, on any other day, because it has places to go and people to see, that bird will dive bomb that cat. And it is, until that cat goes away, that bird is such an amazing, has such a gift for flying that it can get very, very close. It doesn't bother anybody else, but cats it will go after. So that is an example of, you can analyze, you can use your intuition, and now I've just narratively told you the story of barn swallows and cats. So in terms of clinical judgment, this is just a definition that an interpretation of conclusion about a patient's needs, concerns, or health problems, and or the decision to take action or not, use or modify standard approaches, or improvise new ones as deemed appropriate by the patient's response. That's kind of a long definition, but I think if you think about it, you can really imagine that you do that every day. So there are models for clinical judgment, so this is helpful. It's a helpful model for preceptees to, if you want to think through making a clinical decision or help them think through that process. Some of the same characteristics as the 1-minute preceptor that we talked about in Module 1 or the MAP tool that I just mentioned. In the 1-minute preceptor, if you remember, you get a commitment, you probe for supporting evidence, you teach general rules, and then you reinforce what was done right and correct mistakes. And so this whole idea of you notice, respond, reflect, interpret, and I don't know which way it goes around clockwise or counterclockwise, but all of these things are happening as you make a clinical judgment. And individually, when you have a preceptee who is now making decisions on your behalf, maybe they're helping with your patient a load, or they're making home visits with you, and they're taking the lead. When you leave that patient room, then this often happens, is this you use one of these great debriefing tools to think through and discover what's just occurred. This is just another component to expert reasoning and intuition. We look at, some of the things that happen, quick judgments based on experience, that ER nurse being able to assess a person from across the room. Situational awareness is understanding that big picture, the cues that others miss. And so when a staff nurse walks in and just previously, you're just constantly aware what is the status of this situation, this patient, this group of patients. What is the status of things? Deliberate rationality, or it stands at the intersection between theory and practice. So it's what you do. You're aware that this is what supports what's happening, but this is the actual practice. So we know that novices are rather literal. If there's a policy, they follow it without, a lot of times, regard for the circumstance. So let's say you have a policy on blood administration. The novice will get that policy and do the policy, complete the policy without any deviation, and maybe without consideration of the person that's getting the blood. An expert, on the other hand, considers all the nuances, the situation, the individual characteristics of the patient with an awareness of the policy, with an eye toward anticipated outcomes. if needs to be a deviation, it'll be based on experience and the entire picture. And we all know the policies are there as to guide us and not to dictate us, but we always have to be aware that it's not easy to do that, because it takes experience to be able to make that, use that expert reasoning and intuition to make that decision. And sometimes that's the learning process. So I asked Caleb, I mentioned to him that we're all aware that nursing can be terrifying. So I asked him, how do you go about building preceptee confidence? This is the next point. And so this is what Caleb said about building preceptee confidence.
Preceptee confidence, that's a tricky one. Probably tricky in the sense because of the field that I work in is psych nursing, and so more often than not, any nursing student that comes to our facility for a rotation or a clinical experience is already anxious and nervous on top of being a new nurse. So, but I guess if somebody's going to precept with me, they know the setting that I'm in, so they're at least a little bit prepared for that. I try to keep it casual and professional at the same time. I know oftentimes, at least in the 3 times that I've had a preceptee with me, it seems that kind of an underlying concern for all 3 of them was that ability to have a balance. And so I think I try to always have that in place as a reminder for a preceptee. It isn't just about being a new nurse. It isn't just about being a nurse. It's life balance, and you're not going to be a good nurse if you don't have a balance between your professional life and your personal life and whatever else you have going on. So I think that just always being sure to remind them to keep that balance would be the best way to fight the nerves of that last semester.
So Caleb actually focused his comments about building confidence on balance. And in his statement, he had no idea that we would have this slide. We'd be looking at this slide. But I think it's interesting because, if you look at confidence with its definition from Cantor, that confidence is the sweet spot between arrogance and despair, I think that is a very good definition. And this person walking across a tightrope, maybe that's Niagara Falls, that's that famous Melinda gentleman, I believe, but who knows, I don't know who would do that. Obviously has a lot of skill, but he also has balance. And so when you think about students or new graduates developing competence, we have to think that competence and confidence are often interrelated. So here is the reason we're here on this Module 4 is to come up with a plan for a preceptee or a student. So on a plan, you want to decide where you are going, how you will get there, and how you will know when you arrive. So you have to think about who this person is. Is the goal to orient a new employee or a new grad to a unit? Is it to provide management leadership experience for a soon-to-be new grad? Is the goal to provide child health or public health experiences to an undergraduate? So you have to say, who is this person and what do they need? That's the first step. And then you can develop some goals, followed by some objectives and sub-objectives, and link that to whatever outcomes you're interested in. And often people start with outcomes and then move back to the goal. How do we get there if this is where we want to go? So if we look at the people in the river coming down the chute, the kayakers, they probably don't just put in their kayak and go for it, but who knows, they might if they're really want to live dangerously, I guess. what I would do is look at where I want to end up, and then I would look upstream at what that's going to be coming down. So whether you start at the top and just go down and go for it, or you start at the end point and think back, okay, I'm going to have to negotiate this, and I'm going to have to negotiate that, and this is going to be, very steep up at the top. You put all of that together, and that's how you develop your plan. Pretty straightforward and simple. Easier said than done, correct? So the next question to Caleb Jort was, after you accept a student preceptee assignment and receive the objectives for the experience, what are your first steps in preparing and planning an experience for a student preceptee?
The instructors that I've worked with so far have been good about providing me with an itinerary or goals for those preceptees for that semester, and I'll certainly review those. But then probably the most preparatory thing I do is get a meeting as soon as possible with the preceptee and find out really what they want out of the experience. I think that's super important, and it's much the same way I would approach the care of a patient, is finding out what it is their idea of treatment is, find out from the student what their idea of education is, and really what they want to get out of it, and then try to use that, what their desire is, and as the avenue or the vehicle to get to the goals of the course. I don't think any student sets out knowing what the goals of the course are so much as they set out knowing what they want and what kind of nurse they want to be. So I think that's my job as a preceptor, is to match those two things up.
I like honesty is the best policy. And, writing goals and objectives can be a dreary job left to faculty who like to do things like this all day long. I think it's just important to know, what is it about? How do you write these? And where do they come from? So Bloom's original 1956 and then revised in 2009, this is the most familiar taxonomy for domains of learning in which objectives are actually developed. So Bloom actually has 3 areas: cognitive, or the knowledge, psychomotor, or the skills, and affective, which is the attitude. And all 3 need objectives in order to succeed. So in the cognitive domain, Bloom's revised taxonomy is directed by verbs that predict higher order thinking skills, and those verbs might be design, construct, produce, or plan, whereas lower order verbs are recognize, list, name, and find. So everything is based on a hierarchy of learning. In other words, you have to recognize, list, name, and find before you can go out and design, construct, produce, and plan. It's a simple concept, and what we try to do is move students along in the process. So what they're doing as sophomore nursing students is very different than the objectives that we're setting for them when they're seniors. Another classification system for learning was created by Fink in 2003 and is applicable to precepting, since it has relational and interactive components rather than just hierarchical components. So we know that learning is messy. It does not occur just one domain at a time. Okay, we're just going to do psychomotor day, and that's all. We're not going to tie it to knowledge at all. So we know that doesn't happen. So this model allows for lifelong learning and continual growth. So the implications for preceptors are this. First of all, learning objectives must incorporate yet exceed content mastery. So what you want to do is you have some content and people know something, but you want to include more than that. And so that whole idea of learning to understand and remember, actually applying skills and thinking, maybe using the human dimension, crossing over and using the human dimension at some point. The second thing is that this point of combining different components. If you were to combine these interaction effects that are listed on this model, then you will actually enhance the preceptee's learning. So an example of this, let's say we have a new nurse, might work with a preceptor to administer chemotherapy. So to start, they develop foundational knowledge about the drug, the side effects, and the intended outcome. But might also spend time with the patient to discover the meaning of the experience from the patient's point of view. Who are you? What impact does this have on your life? So you take the human dimension and the caring, and you put it with the foundational knowledge. And this model is much more applicable to practice, in my point of view, than the Bloom model, although I think we need both. But this is a really important to think about how people, that whole piece of significant learning. So Caleb was asked, could you give an example of how you establish objectives based on a specific goal within a precepted experience? And here is his answer.
So helping preceptees identify the goals, or the outcomes that they want and the goals that they have for that semester with me. To be perfectly honest, it's hard for me because that's not one of my strengths. It's one of my weaknesses for sure. I'm very good at coming up with solutions to problem, asking good questions, the critical thinking part, but I do struggle when it comes to goals and setting, having them be measurable and attainable, and all of the things you've all learned about goal setting. And so I'll be very honest, I kind of try to push that back onto the student as much as I can, knowing that it's not a strength of mine. And I'll be honest with them and tell them that I'm not good at it, and then probably even give some reasons why it is important to set those goals, and probably even refer to some examples throughout the semester of projects that I'm currently working on or things that are currently going on in my unit that might show where, if I had been a better planner and a better goal setter, we might be in a different spot. We might be further along in solving the problem. So I guess honesty is the best policy on this answer.
So you're probably all familiar with SMART rules for goals, objectives, and outcomes. When we're writing goals and objectives, we want to make sure that they are first specific, what should be accomplished. So you want to describe the knowledge, skills, ability, or judgment that you want to actually measure. What is it? What competency are you looking for? What level of performance? And you want to use strong action verbs in order to do that. Next, objective needs to be measurable. It has to be quantifiable, or it needs, maybe you want to be able to qualify it or have some quality to that objective. So quantitatively, you can say how many times you think you need to see that, or the percentage of time that needs to happen. If it has to be 100% right every time, then you want to say that. Qualitatively, you want to talk about the perceptions related to the experience. And so some reflection on perceptions is important in that also. So the next component is achievable and attainable. So you want that goal to be realistic. The outcome has to be achievable. You want to, and you may need to write goals that are set at this level for the first 6 months, and then you have some additional goals for the next 6 months. Now that makes it achievable and attainable, and makes people successful, actually. So, and then realistic and results-oriented, you want to describe the standard expected, and talk about the available resources. For instance, you often see preceptors say, part of what this person is missing is they haven't actually been to surgery in quite a while. In their schooling, they went through the surgery department, but they really need to go see a surgery, and see what happens and see how what a patient is going through during the assault of surgery, and that's how it's often explained like that. And so then they will understand on the other side how to give better post-op care. So, and then the other piece is the timely, time-bound. What specified period of time do you want to see that achievement? So here's my example from the chemo preceptor, preceptee administering chemo. So I'll write this, and then you can grade it for me. The preceptee will safely administer chemotherapy and document the patient response to the chemo experience in a journal for at least 2 patients on or before week 4 of orientation to the unit. So that's our goal, the end point, is what I want them to do and by what time. And I've considered the SMART rule. Then I'll let you be the judge. It's probably not a perfect objective, but hopefully it will help someone make improvements and help them go along the way. So let's see. I think the last point, one of the last points, is just this whole idea of developing a very deliberate plan, deliberately developing a plan, I guess I should say. So on pages 72 to 73, there's specific guidance provided to guide the development of competence, critical thinking, clinical decision, clinical reasoning, clinical judgment, and confidence in preceptees. And so you want to be able to put this down. What are the strengths that someone brings? What are their needs? What plan do I have? What resources will we need? It's kind of exciting to have all of this at your disposal. And if you had a little time on top of that, that's really wonderful. More and more, I think that organizations are realizing the value of preceptors, and they're really trying to build that into their role and into their reward system. So on pages 100 and 101, there's guidance provided to use existing or to develop goals and objectives and outcomes for preceptor and preceptee experiences. Students coming from academic settings should arrive with goals, objectives, and expected outcomes in place. So that's helpful. You don't have to actually write them. They're already in place. But this is what is the value of the preceptor. The preceptor, we come from education and academia, and we may have all of this, signed, sealed, and delivered, but you are looking at the practice setting and the realities of how you're going to put this plan in place. And so you sit down with the preceptee and say, okay, we could probably do this. I don't know if we'll ever get to this one, but, why don't we start here, and we'll see how that goes, and then we'll move on. Here's your plan. You've got it made. We should be able to do most of this if it all goes well. So that's the part that we want you to contribute. And hopefully you will have a strong plan that you're able to implement. So this is, we've reached the end of Module 4. I want to just reiterate what we've accomplished. We've talked about development of preceptee competence and competence. We've talked about ways a preceptor can help a preceptee develop critical thinking, clinical reasoning, and clinical judgment. We discussed the goals, objectives, and outcomes and how these components of learning experience can help the preceptor and preceptee develop an effective plan. And we've talked about 2 types of learning taxonomies, Bloom's domains and Fink's category of significant learning. So in the blog, hopefully you will all use the blog space, and it's linked again with your password. You can it's linked on the website. So you can either take one of these and blog about it. You don't have to do all of them. Just take one, or you can write your own and just put your situation down and say, this is what I want to talk about, and that would be fabulous. It's just a place that's open. for preceptors. It doesn't include preceptees. It is about precepting for the preceptor. So you might describe a situation where you have seen a preceptee's confidence and competence unfold or develop within a clinical setting. I think this would be a really exciting topic or a story. I'd love to hear a story about that. How did you take that person who came shaking when they first arrived, and how have you seen them develop? And what was the process for doing that? You may have some tools that we have not even heard of before. So, this is just we are just facilitators. We certainly are not the source of all this knowledge. I hope you understand that with all of these modules. Although I'm doing a lot of talking, I wish I was really doing listening, and that's what probably is going to be the most important part with the blog. Identifying a tool you've found helpful for critical thinking, clinical reasoning, and clinical judgment, that would be helpful. Maybe discussing an example of how one of your preceptees have used higher order thinking skills to improve a patient or family's experience in the healthcare system. Talking about maybe how you develop a preceptor development plan. So all of those, I think, will be helpful to us as a community of people who are interested in seeing nurses succeed in practice. So this is the end of Module 4. We hope you will join us for Module 5, where we will discuss and share some of the tools available for evaluation and feedback during a preceptor experience. And we'll have a few more clips from Caleb also. His reflected on feedback and evaluation for us as well. So that is the end of Module 4. I hope you have a great day.